The wind carried a dry whistle across the open plains as the farmer guided his horse along the narrow dirt trail, his new bride riding beside him with her cloak fluttering lightly in the breeze. The sun hung low, casting a golden glow over the land, the kind that made every shadow stretch long and every memory feel closer than it should. He hadn't expected this ride to feel heavy. After all, a man should feel light when he's starting a new chapter. But something in his chest had been tight since morning, as if the land itself was warning him that the past was not done with him yet. His new bride, who carried herself with quiet strength and a steady gaze, smiled gently as she watched the open fields rolling far across the horizon. She wasn't a woman of many words, but whenever she did speak, her voice carried a warmth that could settle a restless heart. The farmer had chosen her because she brought peace into his life, something he thought he'd never find again. And for the first time in months, he'd begun to believe that the storms he carried might finally be calming. But fate in the old American frontier had its own sense of timing, and had rarely cared about the plans of a weary man. The farmer slowed his horse as the trail curved near a dry riverbed. He raised his hand, signaling his bride to stop beside him. Something had caught his eye on the far side of the path, a figure moving slowly under the sharp glare of the sun. At first he thought it might be a traveler or a ranch hand hauling supplies, but as the shape grew clearer, the farmer felt his breath stop halfway in his throat. A woman walked along the path, her head bowed under the weight of a bundle of firewood strapped against her back. Her dress was worn, her steps uneven, and her long hair clung to her neck in the heat. But it wasn't her tired frame that froze him in place. It wasn't even the way she stumbled, as if she had walked for miles without rest. It was the roundness beneath her dress, the unmistakable curve of a swollen belly she held with one hand. His new bride followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing as she tried to understand what had caused him to tense so sharply. The farmer didn't say a word. His jaw locked, his hands tightened around the reins, and his heart began to pound hard enough that he felt it against his ribs, because he knew that figure. He knew that walk. He knew that quiet way she pushed through hardship, as if she had never learned how to stop and ask for help. It was his ex-wife, the woman he once loved with a fire that matched the sun over these plains, the woman who had left with tears in her eyes and words they couldn't take back, the woman whose absence had carved a hollow space inside him, a space he thought he had finally managed to bury, and she was pregnant. The farmer's new bride looked between him and the woman ahead, her calm expression shifting into something unsettled. She had heard stories from folks in town, the quiet whispers about the divorce no one fully understood, the heartbreak that he rarely spoke about. She had sensed from the start that the past still tugged at him, but she had never imagined they would meet her this way, out on a lonely road. Carrying the weight of firewood and a child at the same time, the pregnant woman didn't notice them yet. She kept walking, dragging her feet through the dust, as if each step cost her more than the last. Sweat lined her forehead, and every now and then she paused to take in a shaky breath. The bundle on her back wobbled dangerously. Anyone could see she wasn't supposed to be working like this. Not in her condition, not alone under the scorching heat. The farmer swallowed hard, his throat dry even though the air carried a trace of coolness that afternoon. Memories he'd locked away crawled back with sharp edges. He saw the nights they argued until their voices cracked. He saw the day she packed her belongings and walked away, refusing to let him follow. He remembered how she didn't look back, but her shoulders trembled as she left. And he remembered the emptiness that settled in the house after she was gone. An emptiness so heavy he had to fill it with work, silence, and distance. But he never imagined she'd return like this, or that he'd find her struggling to walk with a child growing inside her. His new bride shifted slightly in her saddle. She didn't speak a word, yet her silence held more questions than she could ever voice. Who was the father of that child? Why was she alone? Why was she carrying firewood in a condition that should have kept her resting indoors? And why hadn't the farmer mentioned the possibility of seeing her again? The farmer felt her gaze, but he couldn't meet it. His eyes were fixed on his ex-wife, who finally stopped walking and bent forward, her hand pressed to her belly. For a moment, he thought she would collapse right there on the trail. The thought shot through him like a jolt. Old loyalties he thought were gone rose up before he could stop them. He nudged his horse forward a few steps without thinking. But his new bride placed her hand gently on his arm. The touch wasn't harsh. It wasn't possessive. But it held caution, reminding him that their life together had just begun and that one wrong move could break the fragile peace they were trying to build. He froze again. Torn between the life he had chosen and the life he once lived, the pregnant woman slowly straightened, lifting her face just enough for him to see the worn expression etched in her features. She looked older than he remembered, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. And then, finally, she saw them. Her eyes widened. Her hand froze midair. The firewood nearly slipped from her shoulder. She stared at him first, as if she couldn't believe he was real. Then she noticed the woman sitting beside him, the one dressed with quiet grace, the one wearing a ring she used to wear in a different season of life. The silence between all three of them felt heavy enough to choke the wind. The farmer's horse shifted under him, and he gripped the reins to steady himself. His heart hammered harder now, not from shock but from the strange mix of regret, confusion and responsibility swirling inside him. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to explain the sight of her carrying firewood while expecting a child. And he didn't know how his new bride would react if the truth behind that pregnancy carried more weight than any of them expected. The pregnant woman lifted a shaking hand to her stomach, her fingers trembling as she tried to steady her breath. She looked at him with a softness that should have been gone by now, a softness that held secrets he was not prepared to face on an open road with his new wife beside him. And then she whispered something under her breath, something he couldn't hear but felt deep in his bones. The farmer didn't move. His bride didn't speak. The woman didn't look away. The sun kept sinking, the wind kept blowing, and the old American plains held its breath as the past and present stood face to face, waiting for someone to make the first move, but no one did. Not yet. The air between them felt tighter than the dry wind sweeping across the land. For a long moment, no one spoke, as if words might shatter the little strength holding each of them upright. The farmer's new bride kept her back straight, her face calm, but he could sense the worry she tried to hide. She had expected a quiet journey home, a simple start to their life together. Instead, she found herself in the middle of a past she knew nothing about. Facing a woman who carried both firewood and a child at the same time, the pregnant woman finally blinked, and her gaze shifted from the bride to the farmer. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before, something that made his chest tighten. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was exhaustion, deep and layered, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. She seemed to steady herself, lifting her chin slightly as if she didn't want pity from anyone, especially not from him. He eased his horse forward another few steps, till he was close enough to see every tired line on her face. The wind tugged at her hair, and he could see now how thin she had become. This wasn't the woman who left the farm with fire in her heart and pride in her voice. This was someone who had walked through storms he knew nothing about. "Are you all right?" he finally managed. Though his voice came out rough, she swallowed before answering, as if even simple words cost her strength. "I'm fine," she said, though her trembling hands suggested otherwise. Her voice still held that quiet determination he once admired, but now it sounded like she was fighting to keep it steady. His new bride stepped down from her horse, boots sinking lightly into the dirt. She didn't approach too quickly or too close. She simply stood there, watching the pregnant woman with a careful expression. There was no sharpness in her eyes, only concern, though she masked it well. She had the grace to stay silent, letting the farmer speak first. But he didn't know where to begin. He looked at the firewood digging into his ex-wife's shoulder, and then at her swollen belly. "You shouldn't be carrying all that alone," he said softly. Her lips pressed together, and a faint hint of stubbornness flickered in her expression. "Some things still need to be done," she replied. "Doesn't matter who's there or not." Those words hit him harder than he expected. They held meaning far heavier than firewood, meaning that hinted at long nights, empty rooms, and a life she had been handling without help. Before he could respond, the woman shifted slightly and winced, holding her belly with both hands for a moment. It wasn't dramatic, just a small, sharp breath she tried to hide. But he saw it. So did his bride. And both of them felt something twist inside. "How long have you been walking like this?" his bride finally asked, her voice gentle. She didn't introduce herself, didn't claim any place or authority. She only sounded like someone concerned about another woman struggling in the heat. The pregnant woman hesitated, eyeing her with a mix of caution and tired respect. "Since morning," she said. "The wood pile at my place was gone. Figured I'd fetch some before the sun set." The farmer felt his jaw tighten. Her place. Where was that? When had she moved back here? And why hadn't anyone told him? He wanted to ask, but something in her eyes warned him not to push too fast. She wasn't ready to tell him more, and he sensed that if he pried at the wrong moment, she might shut him out again, just like before. His bride took a slow breath. "There's a storm coming tonight," she said. "You shouldn't be on the road alone." The pregnant woman looked at her belly, then at the sky. "Storm or not, I've managed." It wasn't a boast. It was simply the truth of someone who had been surviving without help for a long time. The farmer ran a hand along the reins, trying to gather his scattered thoughts. She was back. She was alone. And she was carrying a child. His mind churned with questions that tangled together, each one more unsettling than the last. He had heard rumors in town that a woman had taken the abandoned shack near the old creek road. Folks said she kept to herself, didn't speak much, and only came into town for basic supplies. He never imagined it was her. He never imagined she was close enough to ride past without knowing, and he had no idea who the father of her child was. The thought made his stomach twist. Not from jealousy, but from the sense that something wasn't right. Something felt off from the moment he saw her. The way she walked. The way she held her belly. The way she refused help. This wasn't the life she would choose if she had a partner by her side. Not the woman he knew. He wanted to ask, but before he found his voice, she bent slightly again, pressing a hand against her ribs as if trying to catch her breath. The firewood sank lower behind her shoulder, threatening to slip. His bride stepped forward instinctively. "Let me help you with that." The pregnant woman shook her head quickly. "No, I can do it." The farmer dismounted before she could protest further. His boots hit the ground with a dull thud, and he moved toward her slowly, giving her time to push him away if she wanted. He reached for the firewood, but waited until she met his gaze. This time she didn't argue. She let him lift the bundle from her back, and for a moment her shoulders sagged in relief. He saw how much she had pushed herself, how deeply the struggle had set in, and he felt a knot tighten in his chest. His bride stayed quiet, watching them with thoughtful eyes. She wasn't angry. She wasn't threatened. But she was trying to understand a story she had walked into without warning. The pregnant woman steadied herself and asked softly, "Why are you here?" Her question wasn't sharp. It carried a mix of curiosity and something unspoken, something almost afraid. "We were riding home," he said. "Didn't expect to see you on this trail." She nodded lightly, as if she had expected the world to twist just when she thought she could escape notice. "I didn't plan to cross paths either." The wind blew again, carrying dust across their boots. His horse shifted impatiently, and his bride touched its reins to calm it. She finally asked, "Where's your home now?" The pregnant woman hesitated, then pointed toward a small ridge in the distance. "The old shack near the creek?" He frowned. That place was falling apart. The roof leaked. The foundation was sinking. Even a healthy person struggled to live there, and she was carrying a child. "You shouldn't be there," he said, unable to hide the concern in his voice. "It's all I have," she replied. Those 4 words cut deeper than anything she had said before. The farmer and his bride exchanged a glance. The situation was far worse than they realized, and none of them knew yet how deep the trouble ran, before anyone could speak again. The pregnant woman pressed a hand against her belly with a sharp breath, her face tightening. Not a scream, not panic, but a moment of pain that stole the air from her lungs. She forced herself upright, refusing to show weakness. "I can make it back," she said, though her voice shook slightly. The farmer felt his heart pound. His bride stepped closer, her worry no longer hidden. The sky rumbled faintly in the distance, hinting at the storm rolling closer. And on that lonely road, with firewood at his feet and two women standing on either side of his past and future, the farmer realized that whatever he thought he had left behind was not finished with him, not even close, and the child she carried might hold answers none of them were ready to face. The rumble in the distance grew louder, a low warning crawling across the sky. The farmer looked from the clouds to the woman holding her belly and knew he couldn't just let her walk away. This land was cruel when it turned, and a storm on the open road could break even a strong rider. Let alone a pregnant woman on foot. You're not walking back alone, he said, his voice firmer than before. Not with the weather turning? The pregnant woman shook her head. I'm used to it. I don't care what you're used to, he replied. This is different. His new bride laid a steady hand on his arm. We can at least see her home, she said quietly. Then we'll know she made it safe. Her voice carried a calm resolve that surprised him. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't accusing. She was choosing the decent thing even while standing next to the man, whose past had suddenly taken shape in front of her. The pregnant woman studied the bride for a long moment, as if trying to understand why this stranger would care. There was no scorn in the bride's eyes, no triumph, no smugness. Only a kind of soft worry that seemed out of place in such a tangled moment. If it makes you feel better, you can walk beside the horse, the bride added. You don't have to ride with either of us. The woman's lips twitched, almost forming a tired smile that never fully arrived. Pride doesn't keep you warm in a storm, she murmured, mostly to herself. The farmer led his horse closer. Take my saddle, he said to her. I'll walk. She looked at the horse, then at his boots, then at his bride. Your wife should be the one riding, she answered. The word wife slid between them with quiet weight. The bride's fingers tightened slightly on the reins, but she did not flinch away. We can both ride, she said. He's walked farther than this on worse days. The farmer nodded. Let me help you up. The pregnant woman hesitated, then finally accepted his hand. Her fingers felt smaller, colder, even under the heat of the sun. As he helped her into the saddle, he remembered other times he had lifted her to a horse. Back when laughter still came easy between them. Now every movement felt careful, like stepping near a cliff. Once she settled, keeping one arm protectively around her belly, the bride mounted the other horse again. The farmer hoisted the firewood onto his shoulder and started down the trail on foot, boots scuffing the dirt, the weight of the bundle pressing into his muscles. None of them said much as they moved together down the path. But their silence was not empty. It held questions and memories and quiet guesses. The bride watched the farmer from her saddle. She had married him knowing he carried pain from his first marriage. Folks in town had hinted at harsh arguments and sharp words. Some said his ex-wife had been too proud. Others said he had been too stubborn. No one knew the full truth, and he never gave more than a short answer. Now, she rode behind him. Noticing the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched each time the pregnant woman shifted in the saddle, she could tell he was torn, even without words. Part of him was still trying to protect the woman in front of him, while another part tried to honor the vows he had made to his new life. The bride wasn't a woman easily shaken. She had known hardship as well. She came from a small homestead far to the north, where winter claimed crops and sickness claimed people. She had buried family, lost land, and learned to stand on her own long before she'd met him. She understood that life had sharp edges. The heart sometimes carried old scars that never fully healed. Still, she wondered what this child meant. She wondered whether it belonged to someone else, or whether the town had quietly left out that part of the story. She wondered if, on some level, he had known or suspected the pregnant woman. Riding in the farmer's saddle, felt every slow step of the horse and every curious glance from the new bride. A part of her wanted to tell them both to leave her alone, to let her handle her troubles as she always had. But another part, buried under months of lonely nights and silent fears, was grateful for the brief relief from walking. She had left him once because she thought it was the only way to protect her heart and her pride. Their arguments had grown bitter in that old farmhouse. Money had been tight, the crops failing, and grief had turned them into strangers. She had wanted him to listen, to hold her, to see how afraid she was of losing everything. He had wanted her to stand strong beside him without questioning every decision. Each word they spoke back then seemed to scrape rather than heal. One terrible morning, after another night of harsh words, she had packed a small bag and walked away. She had told herself he didn't need her. She had told herself she didn't need him either. She believed leaving was better than staying in a house filled with angry silence. But life without him had not been the freedom she expected. The man she turned to afterward had promised help and support. But promises on the frontier often faded when the work grew hard. When she found herself carrying a child, that man chose the road instead of the responsibility. By the time she returned to this town, she was alone and already showing. Shame clung to her like dust. She'd found the abandoned shack near the creek and told herself that if she could survive there, she could survive anything. She had not planned on seeing her ex-husband again. She never imagined he had remarried. And she certainly never imagined she would meet his new bride, while she herself carried a child as they walked. The storm clouds pulled closer, turning the sky over the plains a darker shade of blue. The wind picked up, tossing loose dirt into the air. The farmer kept glancing back, checking on both women, his thoughts knotted tighter with each step. He thought of the town, thought of how people would talk if they saw them like this. The farmer and his new bride escorting his pregnant ex-wife home. The frontier might be wide, but word traveled fast, and gossip clung hard in small communities. A man's character could be shaped in other people's minds by what they thought they saw, not by what was true. He wondered what they would say. That he had wronged his first wife? That he had replaced her too quickly? That the unborn child was his, and that he had taken another bride without knowing? Or that he had left her to fend for herself in a broken shack? No matter how the story twisted, someone would cast him as the villain. But more than what people would say, he worried about something else. Standing between his past and his future, he didn't know which way duty pulled hardest. A gust of wind cut across the trail, forcing them to shield their faces. The horses snorted, uneasy. In the distance, the first line of rain blurred the edge of the horizon. "We need to move faster," the bride called. "I'm trying," the farmer answered. Tightening his grip on the firewood, the pregnant woman shifted again, pressing her hand to her side. "There's a shorter way," she said through a tight breath. "Cut through the low pasture and follow the fence line. It's rough, but quicker." The farmer hesitated. That route passed dangerously close to a narrow ravine where the ground sometimes gave way after heavy rain. But the storm looked ready to break, and he didn't want her caught in it. "All right," he said. "We'll cut through." They turned off the main trail, heading across uneven ground. The grass grew higher here, brushing against his boots. The sky darkened. Thunder rolled again, closer now, like the land itself was responding to the turmoil in their hearts. As they moved, another worry crept into the farmer's mind. His farm lay in the opposite direction. Every step they took toward her shack was a step away from the house, where he and his bride were supposed to begin their life together. He wondered what it meant. His first act as a married man was walking his ex-wife home through a growing storm. Carrying her firewood on his back while his new bride watched, he wondered if this was a test of his character, of his loyalty, of the vows he had made. The bride understood that tension without needing him to say it. She saw how he carried the wood like a silent apology, how he glanced at the pregnant woman with regret he couldn't hide. She saw, too, that he looked at her with the fear of losing something before it even had a chance to settle. But she was not a fragile woman. She refused to be just a shadow walking behind another love story. If she was going to build a life with him, she needed to know his truth, not just the pieces people whispered in town. She decided she would talk to the pregnant woman alone if the chance came. Not to pick at wounds, but to understand the kind of man she had married. As the first drops of rain started to fall, big and heavy, they finally saw the outline of the shack near the creek. It leaned slightly, as if tired of standing, the roof sagging, the walls patched with mismatched boards. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. There were no animals in sight, no stacked supplies. No sign of another person waiting there. The bride felt her chest tighten. This was not a place fit for a woman in her condition, let alone a newborn. The farmer slowed, staring at the small structure. He had seen hardship before, but something about this scene hit him harder than he expected. The woman he once shared a bed with was living like this. A short ride from his well-built farmhouse. Without him ever knowing, he shifted the firewood on his shoulder and thought about the empty room at his place. The room that had once belonged to his first wife. The room his new bride planned to make her own. Behind him, the pregnant woman watched his expression carefully. She knew that look. It was the look he wore when he was about to take responsibility for something, whether or not it belonged to him. It was part of why she had fallen for him in the first place, and part of why their fights had hurt so deeply. She could feel the baby move faintly under her hand. That small motion reminded her what was at stake. She had told herself she would raise this child alone if she had to. But seeing him again stirred old hopes she thought she had buried. She knew the truth of the child's father. He did not. The bride dismounted first and moved toward the shack, taking in the broken window and crooked door. She ran her fingers along the rough wood, feeling the splinters. This place told its own story. One of long nights, patched fixes, and quiet endurance. The farmer finally reached the porch, shoulders aching from the weight of the wood and the weight of his thoughts. He set the bundle down by the door and straightened slowly. Rain beginning to soak into his shirt. He could feel the storm building above and between them. Not just in the clouds, but in the choices waiting ahead. Inside this sagging shack lived a past he didn't fully understand. A woman he had failed in ways he hadn't yet named, and a child whose place in his life was still a mystery. Behind him stood his new bride. The woman who had trusted him enough to tie her future to his. He stood between two worlds as thunder rolled over the plains and rain began to fall harder around them, knowing that whatever happened next would change the course of every life standing in that small yard. Rain thickened as the storm rolled across the plains, turning the air heavy and cold. The farmer stood beneath the sagging roof of the shack, watching the water slide off the edges in uneven streams. The bride stood beside him, her cloak damp, her gaze drifting over the small structure that barely held itself upright. Inside, the pregnant woman sat slowly on a worn chair, her hand resting on her stomach. She breathed through the discomfort spreading across her ribs. The wind rattled the crooked door. The storm wasn't letting up. The creek behind the shack was already rising, muddy water swirling faster than it had an hour ago. The bride sensed danger in the wind, the kind that only rough country folks recognized. She stepped closer to the farmer and spoke low so the pregnant woman wouldn't hear. "This place won't hold in a hard storm," he nodded. He had known the moment he saw the shack leaning in the wind. The boards were swollen, the roof patched with old tin sheets, and one entire corner threatened to give way. He had fixed enough buildings in his life to know when something was barely standing, but what weighed heavier on him was the knowledge that she had been living here alone for months. Lightning split the sky, lighting up the cracked window for a flash. The pregnant woman looked toward them with tired eyes, catching the unspoken worry between them. She took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. "It's not as bad as it looks," she said, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. The farmer stepped inside fully, letting the door creak shut behind him. He scanned the one-room space. A small bed pushed against the far wall, a table missing a leg, a water bucket, a lantern. No food in sight, only the faint smell of damp earth. "You've been living here alone?" he said, not as a question, but as something he still struggled to accept. She looked away. "I manage." The bride stepped closer, her voice soft. "Managing and surviving aren't the same." The pregnant woman's shoulders stiffened. She didn't want pity. She didn't want them thinking she couldn't stand on her own. But her strength had limits. Both of them could see she was near those limits now. A sharp crack of thunder shook the shack, making the walls shudder. Water began seeping through a split in the roof, dripping onto the bed. The woman instinctively shifted closer to the table, her hand tightening on her belly. The farmer felt his heart pound harder. This wasn't just about helping someone in need. This was about a woman he once promised to protect. and a child whose truth might change everything. He knelt next to her, his voice low. "You can't stay here tonight." She didn't answer at first. Her eyes shimmered with something between fear and pride. "I don't want trouble," she whispered. "Not for you. Not for her." The bride stepped forward. "You're not trouble," she said firmly. "You're in danger. That storm will wash this place away." The woman looked at her closely, not with envy or resentment, with confusion. The bride's kindness felt foreign, unexpected. "I can ride." The pregnant woman said quietly. "No," the farmer insisted. "Not in this storm. The creek is rising. The trail will flood." The woman closed her eyes as another wave of pain tightened her breath. She tried to hide it, but her face betrayed her. The bride saw it first and stepped forward, kneeling beside her. "That wasn't just from walking, was it?"
Your bride asked.
The pregnant woman hesitated under her gaze. Then finally she whispered, "They've been coming more often." The bride's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "How often?" "Every few days," the woman said. "Sometimes at night. Sometimes when I'm fetching water." The farmer felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the storm. He looked between them. "Has anyone been helping you?" he asked. Though he already suspected the answer, she shook her head. "Where's the father?" he pressed. The woman wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to protect something fragile inside her. "Gone." The farmer didn't miss the way her voice cracked on that single word. The bride watched her carefully. "Did he leave you willingly?" she asked gently. "Or did something happen?" Another long silence settled. Outside, rain hammered the roof like a warning. The creek roared louder. The pregnant woman finally answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "He left when I told him about the baby." The farmer felt the breath leave his chest. The answer cut him deeper than he expected. Not because of jealousy, not because of the betrayal, but because she had been abandoned when she needed someone most, because she had endured everything alone, because she had returned to a town where his name still held weight, and yet she had no one to turn to. The bride's expression softened even more. She reached out and took the woman's hand gently. It was a small gesture, but it carried strength. "You're not alone now," she said quietly. Lightning flared again, illuminating the room. A loud crack echoed from outside. The farmer rushed to the window and saw that a tree limb had fallen dangerously close to the shack. "We must leave now," he said with urgency. "The creek is crossing the path. If it blocks the road, we'll be trapped here." The woman tried to stand, but another pain tightened her breath. She gripped the table, struggling to stay upright. "I can walk," she whispered. But the tremor in her legs said otherwise. The bride moved to her side, placing a steady arm around her. "You don't have to." Another crash of thunder shook the walls. The farmer grabbed the firewood and shoved it aside, clearing space to lift her if needed. The shack groaned under the pressure of the wind. The pregnant woman looked between them, her face pale with fear and hesitation. "I don't want to go back to your house," she whispered to the farmer. He paused, the words hitting him harder than the storm outside. "Why?" "Because it's not my place anymore," she said. "It belongs to her. And you." The bride stepped closer, her voice steady. "A safe roof belongs to anyone who needs it." The woman swallowed hard, tears threatening behind her tired eyes. She didn't want to accept pity. But this wasn't pity. This was survival. Outside, the creek crashed against its banks. A violent gust struck the shack, shaking it so strongly that dust fell from the beams above them. The bride spoke firmly. "She cannot stay here another minute."
Oh.
The farmer nodded. "I'll carry her." Before the woman could protest, he moved gently but decisively, sliding one arm under her legs and another around her back. She gasped softly at the sudden lift, but she didn't resist. She wrapped one arm around his shoulders for balance, her other hand instinctively covering her belly. The bride grabbed the lantern and pushed open the door. Rain slammed into them instantly, soaking her cloak and stinging her cheeks. The horses, tied to the leaning fence, shifted anxiously. The farmer stepped out with the woman in his arms, the storm whipping his hair and shirt as the wind tried to push him off balance. The bride ran ahead, holding the lantern high, to guide him through the darkening yard. They moved slowly at first, then faster, as the shack behind them groaned louder. The pregnant woman buried her face against his shoulder as thunder cracked overhead. The farmer held her tightly, steadying his steps through the muddy ground. The bride reached the horses and quickly mounted hers, then grabbed the reins of the second horse. When the farmer approached with the woman in his arms, the bride leaned down and helped seat her on the saddle, supporting her carefully as the wind lashed at them. "Hold on to me," the bride said. The woman hesitated, then finally wrapped shaky arms around the bride's waist. The bride didn't flinch. She tightened her grip around the woman's hands. Grounding them both, the farmer mounted the other horse and took the lead. "Stay close. Don't let go." The storm roared louder. Rain poured like sheets, blurring the trail. The creek water surged across the path, swirling around the horses' hooves. Lightning flashed, revealing how quickly the land had flooded. The bride's horse stumbled once in the mud. Drawing a frightened gasp from the woman holding her, the farmer circled back, guiding them around a fallen branch. "Keep her steady," he shouted through the storm. The bride nodded, gripping the reins and the woman behind her. The pregnant woman clung to her, trembling both from the storm and from the uncertainty ahead. The wind howled. The plains vanished behind a curtain of rain. Every step the horses took felt like a battle. The farm was still far. The storm was worsening, and the woman's breaths grew heavier, shorter, more strained. The farmer pushed forward, heart pounding. He knew they were running out of time. The storm was only one danger. The creek was another. And then there was the final truth waiting to be spoken. A truth that could break something inside him, or bind them all in a way none of them expected behind him. The pregnant woman tightened her arms around the bride and whispered shakily, "I'm scared." The bride placed her hand over the woman's. "We'll get you through this." But even she felt the fear rising. As another bolt of lightning split the sky, the farmer saw the next hill. The farm lay just beyond it, and with every step, toward it. The storm, the secrets, and the future all collided, pushing them to the edge of a moment that could change everything. Rain poured down so hard it felt like the sky had split open. The farmer rode ahead, guiding his horse through the flooded pasture. But his eyes never drifted far from the bride behind him, who held the pregnant woman tightly on the second horse. The storm seemed bent on testing them, thrashing the plains with wind strong enough to topple small trees. But they kept going step by steady step, toward the farm that waited beyond the hill. When they finally reached the ridge, the farmer pointed. "There," he shouted over the storm. "The barn is closer. We'll shelter there." The bride nodded, pushing her horse onward. The pregnant woman clung to her, teeth clenched as another sharp pain rippled through her sides. She tried to steady her breathing, but every jolt of the horse seemed to stir something inside her. The bride felt the tremors in her arms and urged the horse faster. They reached the barn just as thunder shook the ground. The farmer leapt off his horse, threw the barn doors wide, and guided both animals inside. The moment they were safe beneath the wooden beams, he turned and helped the bride bring the pregnant woman down from the saddle. Her legs gave out the moment her boots touched the straw-covered floor. "I've got you," the farmer said, catching her before she fell. The bride rushed to support her other side. "Let her lean on us. Easy now." They moved her to a stack of hay bales near the back of the barn. The storm thundered outside, shaking the roof, but the barn held strong. Lantern light cast a warm glow over the wooden walls, giving them a moment of calm after the harshness outside. The woman sat heavily, one hand gripping the farmer's arm as she tried to breathe through another tightening in her belly. Her face paled, her breaths coming quicker. The bride knelt beside her. "You're not just tired. It's starting, isn't it?" The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I think the baby's coming." The farmer stiffened, his breath catching in his throat. Fear, guilt, and protectiveness churned inside him all at once. "Should we send for the midwife?" he asked, already stepping toward the door before the bride stopped him. "You can't go out there," she warned. "Heaven knows what's flying across those fields. We'll have to handle this ourselves for now." The farmer swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling fully on his shoulders. He glanced at the pregnant woman, the one he once loved. the one who had faced months of hardship alone. He looked at his bride, who had shown nothing but steady strength since the moment they found her. "Tell me what to do," he said. The bride tightened her cloak around her shoulders. "We need clean cloth, hot water if we can warm it, blankets, and something for her to grip." The farmer ran to the farmhouse through the storm. Returning minutes later, soaked, but carrying everything she asked for, they spread blankets across the hay bales and helped the woman lie back. She gripped the bride's hand as another wave of pain tightened through her belly. "You're safe," the bride whispered. "We're with you." The farmer knelt near her other side, wiping her forehead with a cloth. He felt her fingers grip his wrist tightly. Even in her pain, she held on. "Tell me the truth," he said softly, leaning closer. "Before the baby comes. I need to know. Is the child mine?" She met his gaze, tears gathering in her eyes. For a moment, she stayed quiet, letting the storm outside fill the silence. Then she shook her head gently. "No," she whispered. "He's not." The farmer closed his eyes, drawing in a deep breath. Relief, confusion, and sadness tangled in his chest. Relief that he wasn't responsible for a betrayal that never happened. Sadness for the life she had endured alone. Confusion for why she hadn't told him sooner. She reached for his hand again. "I didn't want you thinking I came back to trap you," she said. "I lost everything when he left. I just had nowhere else to go." The farmer squeezed her hand, steady and firm. "You didn't come here to trap anyone. You came because you're human and needed help. There's no shame in that." The bride placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm. "We'll help you. Not because of the past. Not because of secrets. Because no woman should bring a child into this world alone." The woman looked between them, her eyes shining with gratitude. She couldn't speak. Another contraction hit, making her gasp and grip both their hands. Hours passed inside the barn as the storm raged outside. The bride guided her through each breath, each push, steady as a rock. The farmer stayed at her side, offering strength in ways words couldn't. The wind howled. Rain hammered the roof and lightning flashed across the sky. But inside, the barn felt like a small pocket of warmth. Near dawn, the storm finally began to weaken. The wind softened and the first hint of light glowed through the cracks in the wooden walls. At that moment, the barn filled with a soft cry. The baby's first sound. The bride gently wrapped the newborn in a warm blanket. The farmer felt his breath hitch as the tiny life moved in her arms, pink and healthy. The pregnant woman now, a new mother, reached out with trembling hands. "He's perfect," she whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. The bride handed the baby to her and touched her shoulder gently. "You're safe now. Both of you." The farmer stood back, letting the mother hold her son, but the feelings stirring inside him were heavier than he expected. Pride for her strength, sadness for her lonely months, gratitude for the bride beside him, and something else too. A sense that life was offering all three of them a chance to start over, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as human beings tied together by fate and circumstance. Hours later, when the storm had fully passed and the sun began warming the wet fields, the farmer helped the woman to the farmhouse. The bride prepared a warm meal, lit the fire, and laid out blankets near the hearth. The mother and child rested peacefully for the first time in months. The farmer stepped outside with the bride, watching the sun rise over the clearing sky. The land looked washed clean, fresh, and full of promise. The bride wrapped her cloak tighter and leaned against him. "You did right today," she said softly. "I couldn't walk away," he answered. "Not from her. Not from the baby. Not from doing what was right." The bride nodded. "I know. And that's why I married you." He looked at her, the woman who had stood strong through the storm, would help bring another woman's child into the world with grace instead of jealousy. He felt a deep gratitude for her presence, her courage, her heart. Inside, the mother stirred, calling softly. The farmer and bride returned to the house. The woman looked calmer, her face relaxed. Her child nestled in her arms. "I don't know how to thank you both," she said. "You saved us." The bride smiled gently. "You don't know thanks. Just promise you won't face the world alone anymore." The woman nodded. I want to do right by my son. I want to build a better life. The farmer sat beside her. You'll stay here until you're strong enough to make plans. We'll help you rebuild. The shack isn't fit for you or the baby. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they came with hope instead of fear. She held her child closer, whispering his name softly. The bride looked at both of them, then placed her hand over the farmer's. This house has room for kindness. That's what makes it a home. The mother smiled, tired but sincere. Then maybe this is where I'm meant to start again. The storm clouds drifted away, leaving the plains bright and open. The land felt new, as if washed clean of old hurts. The farmer stood between the two women, one from his past, one from his future, and felt peace settle inside him. They weren't bound by anger anymore. They weren't divided by mistakes. They were three lives woven together by compassion, resilience, and the simple truth that every person deserved a fresh start. The bride leaned her head against his shoulder. The mother rocked her newborn gently, and the farmer looked out at his land, knowing that the hardest part of the story had passed. What lay ahead was hope. What remained between them was understanding. And what carried them forward was the quiet promise of a new beginning that would make the old American plains feel like home again.